Hello and welcome. This is Mouse Gunner, and we're back with some more Kerbal Space Program, continuing on Mouse Gunner's quest. Now, Mouse Gunner's quest has been to build a craft in the spaceplane hangar that can go down a runway, into the atmosphere, through the atmosphere into space, and achieve a stable orbit. That's the most important element. And the other part of this task is also, hopefully, to have enough fuel that if we so chose, we could leave that stable orbit and come back down into Kerbin's atmosphere. And theoretically also land safely, whether that is on actually landing or just using parachutes to land us. In any case, I have good news for you. I have done it. Finally, this is the fourth video on this. I have achieved the mission that I have long sought for, and I can prove that to you. If we go to this survey station, we can see a craft orbiting Kerbin right now. And it does indeed have a stable orbit. Now, it is not a very high orbit necessarily, but it is a stable orbit, and that's all we need. Because in theory, if we can achieve a stable orbit, we can get a refueling craft up into orbit to come refuel the vehicle, and then it can go on to other missions. Or, if that is not an option, we can just use what fuel is left over to come back down to the surface of Kerbin, land and refuel or recover the craft as needed. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at what we did to get there. Now, in the last video, I showed off the X5, which was by and far the most promising craft that I had designed. Now, I don't know if the results were all that impressive in that particular video, but what I did is I tried to replicate that success, and I built a number of variations of the X5 with a lot of, different experimental ideas. First off, I went from the X5 to the X5L, and the X5L is essentially a lengthened version, and it's lengthened to allow for more fuel. So the theory being there is I just didn't have quite enough fuel to get there. We ran out of fuel before I could get a stable orbit. So adding more fuel seems like the right thing to do. Well, that wasn't any more successful than the original X5, and I think I made all their alterations besides, but the point is that wasn't any more successful. Adding fuel adds weight. More weight means it takes more thrust to get you up to speeds and get you up there. So you burn the fuel, you burn more fuel to achieve the same results. So in the end, if you're burning more fuel than you were before, you're actually going to get worse or relatively the same results. And that was more or less what I saw. So then I tried a bunch of other variations. The X5A2 is kind of an interesting variation that I'd like to show you. And that was the testing of it, kind of a experimental idea, which is using these monopropellant fueled engines, which we have a number of those there. Now, they don't have a lot of thrust, but once you get them up into a vacuum, they produce 20 apiece. And having 6 of these on, that's 120 thrust. And one of these Rapier engines by itself in a vacuum produces 180. So we're getting pretty close to the thrust that one Rapier engine would produce, but with not that much added weight, as the mass of these is only 0.09. Tons, as opposed to the 2 tons that each of these Rapier engines weighs. So you multiply that times 6, and you're a lot less weight than these Rapier engines, and you're getting close to the power. This worked okay, but it honestly wasn't that far off of. I think this was probably the most successful of the X5 variants, but it wasn't that far off of the success of just the plain X5. I also did a lightweight variant where I tried to strip out as much weight as I physically could, and one of the things that I did a lot with these is I lowered the amount of fuel that I had in the wings down to what was more required. So I had a little bit of a safety net with the liquid fuel, but really reducing down how much liquid fuel I had carried in these wings to reduce as much weight as I could. So I had a very much lightweight variant. And that was pretty successful, but still, it's one of those things that I might have gotten a stable orbit one time out of 100, but it just not consistent enough. You just had to play everything perfectly to get that orbit, and you would have just gotten barely there. So I was then considering a couple other options of things I could do. Now, you're already familiar with the X6, and that's experiment, and that was just a complete and total failure. The X7 was an even more lightweight variant, I believe, if I remember correct. Oh, no, wait, I'm sorry. The X7 was trying to be as lightweight as possible. So it's the same kind of overall design, but we're using only one engine. We're using a lot less fuel. Well, not a lot less fuel, but we're using the smaller fuel tanks to try and reduce that weight. And as a result, a lot of my X5s were coming in roughly around 20 tons. This comes in around 14.2. But the point is that one engine isn't able to give us enough thrust to really make up for that. I mean, honestly, although this is a lot lighter than the X5s were, those had two engines, and they weren't, they were less than double the weight. So having double the thrust, but, not being double the weight, obviously you're going to have more performance. So the X7 was kind of a dead end. And then I went with the X8, which was taking the X5, at least the idea of the X5, and trying to make it even lighter, as light as I possibly could. So I used a different cockpit, again, to lighten it up, and I'm able to achieve, more or less the same capability, but with only a weight of 18.6 tons. So we're seeing that weight is being brought down, where I think the first X5 I showed you was somewhere around 22.4 tons, somewhere around there. So we're really getting that weight down, but still just not good enough. So I was thinking to myself, lighter is better, but what really seems to be giving me the best results is not a matter of how much fuel I'm having, how much weight I have. I mean, those things factor in, but honestly, it's the power. So I was just thinking, this fuselage is a decent design. Why don't I work with that design, but kind of multiply it? So what we have now is the X9, and if you paid attention to earlier, this is the craft that was orbiting Kerbal. So we have the X9. Now, what the X9 is, in simple terms, is two of the X5's fuselages essentially glued to a central fuselage. And then we have the wings off to either side. Now, I used full fuel capacity in these wings, as this does consume quite a bit more fuel than the X5s did, so that it's not like it had a lot of extra fuel. But we also noticed that we have a lot more thrust going. We have the thrust that each of those X5s would have, but you only have the weight of one wing, for instance, rather than, each of these fuselages being two wings. So you have two total wings. I mean, so it's not like truly two X5s weights being added on, because you're only having a wing from each of those fuselages, I guess is the best way to describe that. And then we have the central fuselage with its own engine. So we have a total of 5 engines, giving us a lot of power. And then our total weight comes in at 45.7 tons. So that is roughly double the weight that the X5 was weighing, but with more thrust than what we had before. And technically, I think more fuel per engine overall. And this is what we ended up with. Now, so just to show off some of the other things I did, with the landing gear, we have a set of 4 landing gear here, kind of evenly distributed, because we have this wider base that really allows for it. Some other things I was doing in earlier versions is I was using fuel lines to transfer fuel to the different areas. I realized that was unnecessary, actually. This fuselage being next to this fuselage does allow for fuel transfer. The only reason that I would require that if there was some kind of structure in between these two structures that didn't transfer fuel. It would be the main reason why I would need those fuel transfer tubes. So, not needing them, why put them on? They're just extra weight. Obviously, when we want to reduce the weight as much as possible. I even allowed for the further mission. I did add a docking port so that I could refuel. So everything that would be necessary to achieve this craft's mission is included. We have 2 parachutes in case we need to make emergency landing and a landing with the landing gear just won't work. Let's say if we have to ditch in the ocean, or I just feel particularly lazy. Now, I have not tested out this parachute system, so I don't know if it will honestly work. Another thing that I didn't do is previously in a lot of other incarnations, I would have added struts to strengthen the structure. Well, I found that that was not necessary, and each of those struts does add on quite a bit of weight. So again, to keep the thing lightweight, I didn't do that. Otherwise, I'm not really sure if there's anything that really needs to be said. Now, I'm using the air intakes here mostly for aesthetics rather than performance. Obviously, the central air intake, the one that I'm using in the middle, is the more efficient of the bunch, but I kind of like the look of these ones, so that's why we did it. So some of this is aesthetical choices, but honestly, this craft functions perfectly, and we're going to demonstrate that now by launching it. So let's go ahead and get going. Now, there's a lot of things you have to pay attention to do a successful launch, and hopefully you'll kind of learn that from my example. If you struggle with Kerbal Space Program and getting a stable orbit, even with just rockets, which are, trust me, are a lot easier to do than these space planes, hopefully you can learn some of the things that I do from this. But in any case, let's go ahead and get into the launch. I think we've talked enough about the design. And as per usual, the first thing we're going to start off doing is we're going to set up the SAS. We're going to bring our thrust all the way up, select our fuel. Now, one thing I did add on that was in the X5 is these the solar panels, which you will need as the electrical charge is not a whole lot, and our engines do not generate them. So let's go ahead and thrust. And your SAS is going to consume electrical charge, and we're going to need it throughout this flight because the SAS really helps stabilize your craft. Now, the one thing I'm going to have to watch out for this craft is not changing direction too hard, as that does cause a few issues. Mostly, too many G's will be transferred to the craft as it has quite a lot of speed. As a matter of fact, what I'm going to do here is roughly aim for 30 degrees I'm not even sure what to call that. Aim for 30 degrees as far as where we are for the horizon, so that we are gaining altitude. But you will see that we gain quite a lot of speed. There is a lot of thrust in this engine. As a matter of fact, this is the only craft I've seen. What I hope will happen again here in a second. I've only seen this craft achieve this, especially as a space plane. But as you can see, there's quite a lot of airflow over this as we're going very, very fast. We're above 600 meters per second, and now we've achieved that effect. We actually have fire coming off our plane. We're going that fast through the atmosphere. We're going achieving over 900 meters a second while in the atmosphere. We're going to need to switch over to the rocket engines here, the oxidizer, and this is where I'm going to switch over to this part, and then we're going to increase our angle of attack to 60 degrees so that we gain altitude here, and I'm going to be watching this, and as soon as I achieve the height to achieve a stable orbit, I'm going to cut off, that's good enough. And now we need to set ourselves a maneuver. All you have to do is left click on your trajectory to set a maneuver, and then you just pull here to get roughly what you want to do. Is that's a little bit too far. I want to get a roughly even orbit. So roughly, oh, that's not good. Let's cancel this orbit here. I didn't put the maneuver quite where I wanted it. Let's put it right here. We have to be kind of quick about this. So add the maneuver. All right, there we go. All right, that's probably still a little too high. Come on. All right, so that's way too high. So let's bring it down. So all I'm doing is I'm kind of pulling. This way makes the opposite side increase. The other way makes it decrease. And I'm trying to get it to be a roughly level. So 83 and 50, that's not a stable orbit. 76 and 125. We're probably going to have to settle on that because I don't think we have time to do anything else. And I don't want this to be too low here. So that's probably going to be fine. We're going to be a little high on one end. Hopefully we don't burn off too much fuel doing that. And let's get out of the menu. We're now in the space, which if you hear the music now, that indicates that. We're about 37 seconds away from our thrust point. And as you can see, we have plenty of fuel to do this. So if I fail to get an orbit, that's because I personally messed up. Okay, and we can go ahead and turn on our RCS, which is going to give us little puffs of gas to help us give a little bit more controllability and space. And this blue marker is roughly where I want to face for the burn time. Here's the burn time. We have the node. Oh, I should have been thrusting. So I kind of messed that up, a little too late on the thrust. You would probably want to start about 10 seconds before the time, but it gives you a roughly estimated burn time. I'm now going to switch to the map so we can see this happening. So it's going to take a little while for it. As you can see, our burn time is at 30 seconds, and I kind of messed this up a little bit, so it's not going to be perfect. Probably going to end up burning off more fuel than I needed to, as I wasn't paying attention to the arrival time of the node, and I thrust a little late. But usually speaking, you want to thrust maybe 10 seconds before you hit the node. But as you can see, we're starting to get that orbit. We're starting to get there. We're starting to get there. We're starting to get there. I'm going to start thrusting off here. And let's see what our orbit looks like. So we've got 74-ish there and 91 there. That looks like roughly a stable orbit. We could probably even aim up a little bit to try and get our orbit a little bit higher here. There we go. We've got 76 there and 99 there. And there you go. And we have plenty of fuel left over. We got 408 oxidizer. I probably burnt more fuel than I needed to because I wasn't paying attention to the ideal time. But honestly, that probably is enough fuel to knock us out of orbit. Now, as I said, the most of the part of the mission that I'm trying to achieve here is getting a stable orbit, and we are able to achieve that, in my opinion, relatively easily. Even with me not doing the optimum things that I needed to do to get that to happen, we still achieved it with pretty in my opinion, ease. So we definitely were not just barely doing this mission. We had plenty of fuel left over. So there you go. There's our mission achieved. Now I could then try and get out of the orbit if you want me to. We could try and do that. So let's see. To get out of the orbit, what we'd want to do is we want to face the I forget what the term for this one is. It's the we actually can go to the map here. So we have the periapsis here, which is the height here, and then we have the apoapsis on the other side. I think we want to aim here if we want to slow down when we're getting to our periapsis. So let's go ahead and fire up our thrusters, and hopefully we will get the result that we reduce our... There we go. So, and we even have fuel left over, honestly. So this just destroyed our stable orbit, and now we will land back down on Kerbal. So again, we had plenty of fuel to even do that. As a matter of fact, it's a lot harder to... It takes a lot more fuel, and it's a lot harder to get a stable orbit than it is to, obviously land back down on Kerbal. Now, I am going to go ahead and, now that we've gotten rid of our stable orbit, I'm going to aim the craft back around to our periapsis again. I always forget which one's which. I think it's periapsis. Yeah, okay. Which means that we're now going in the direction of our travel, essentially. And let's go ahead and get rid of our maneuver there. So essentially, that's how you can do a lot more complex missions, is adding maneuvers. That's not something that they tell you about in the tutorial, but this will really help you with more complex missions. Let's say you're trying to get to Mun, and you want to get get into orbit of Mun. This is the best way to do it, because you can kind of do a pre-planned maneuver. Once you get a stable orbit, you just essentially click on somewhere on your orbit, add a maneuver, and you just adjust the maneuver until it gets you the results you want it to get. It's a lot better than just start thrusting and hope you achieve it. So that's one of the best ways to get the results you want, is adding maneuver. It tells you which direction to point your craft in, roughly what time you should start thrusting. Usually, in my experience, you want to thrust a little bit before you actually hit your node. but that's all you have to do. So I hope that helps you guys out. If you are a little bit newer or maybe a little bit more inexperienced with Kerbal Space Program, doing a lot more of the complex missions, or maybe just getting a stable orbit. It's a little bit harder to do a stable orbit because you have to do it quickly because your area of opportunity is diminishing. Because once you pass the apoapsis, you're going to start falling. So you definitely want to do that. You want to do your maneuver before you get there, and that's really key. So that is the one tricky thing about doing a stable orbit. Okay, so let's go ahead and speed up time until we come back down into the atmosphere. Oh, I forgot to show off the solar panels. Unfortunately, we're in the dark side, so I don't think we're getting any electrical charge, and we're almost out of electrical charge. So that was kind of an error on my end. But I do have these solar panels that will extend to give me electrical charge, because as you can see, we're almost out, and that's going to be kind of a problem. As a matter of fact, I may have to just ditch it rather than try and land, because I don't think we're going to continue to have SAS. As a matter of fact, I'm going to turn off the SAS, and immediately we start having problems. Yeah, so probably what's going to happen here is the SAS is going to run out, and then the craft is going to start tumbling. That doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to die. That just means that I forgot to get electrical charge when I needed to, and that is a problem. And that is a definite problem with this craft, is that those engines do not produce any electricity for you. So you will run out of electrical charge unless you have another means to get it. And now our electrical charge is running out. We will run out of our SAS ability, and our craft will essentially start being a little uncontrolled. So that is something to be wary of. Okay, so let's go ahead and speed things up until we come back down into the atmosphere. We should already be falling here. And you can see the RCS thrusters trying to kind of help us out. It looks like the SAS is still working, honestly, even though technically we have no electrical charge left. So I'm not sure if that's working as intended, but let's go ahead again. Get down back into the... Oh, okay, there goes the SAS. And now we're tumbling uncontrolled. I could try and correct this, but I have noticed with space planes that there tends to be a tendency, if you don't have a lot of thrust going, they kind of go into a death spiral that is very hard to correct for. And this is the main reason I'm going to end up having to ditch. So this is where we get to test out to see if our parachute does indeed work. There is a possibility, because I did not strengthen the structure when we hit the parachutes, that the structure under the G's of the parachute's opening will actually rip apart, and then unfortunately Bill Kerbal here will die a horrible death, but it happens. Okay, so we're falling, let's speed that up a little bit more. I like to slow it down when we start having that fire effect, because I think that's really cool. And we also have that at nighttime, so it should be a really nice light show for us. It should be happening sometime soon, although the tumbling effect actually might prevent that, because we're now going at such a slow velocity due to the tumbling that I don't think we're going to actually burn up, because as you see here, our meters per second is really slow. And here we keep going. I kind of wonder if the flight model for the space planes are a little bit iffy, because I've noticed a tendency to go into death spirals seemingly happens a lot. But eventually we're going to hit the space bar here and open up our parachutes. Probably when we get down to about 5,000 meters, that will help us start slowing down and maybe gain a little bit more control and get rid of some of the spin we have going on here. But we're not dropping all that fast, so I don't think it's that much of a worry. I mean, this plane has a lot of lift, and that might be a lot of the reasons why this death spiral happens. And it's because the plane's trying to lift, but it just doesn't have the velocity to do it. Okay, we're going to hit the parachutes. Now, we do have 2 of them. Hopefully this is enough to stop the craft, although the craft is a lot heavier than what we've had in the past, and we are using the same number of parachutes to achieve that effect. Eventually, when we get down to 500 meters, the parachutes will open fully. But as we can see, our speed, our descent speed is not that high, so hopefully the G's that we're going to exert here when the parachute finally does open is not going to be too severe. Alright, I'm going to start slowing it down once we get close to our parachute height. so that we can see that happen at real time. And hopefully this is the area we want it to open. Yeah, okay, so we didn't rip apart, and it seems like we had a successful mission. We're going to ditch in the ocean here. Now the ocean, I think it's L for running lights. No, apparently not. Okay, that's fine. There should be lights on the landing gear. I forget what button it is, honestly, to activate the lights. No big deal. But anyway, we're going to be splashing down here soon. I mean, our craft broke apart a little bit when we hit the water, but that tends to happen. The main part is we survived. You know, Bill Kerman is alive. Honestly, this is not your ideal. Your ideal would be to land on land with the landing gear, and hopefully that would keep the craft intact. This was more or less our last resort, ditching it. Most of the craft is going to survive this experience, but the real important part is that Bill Kerman here is still alive. Okay, so we had ourselves a successful mission. I believe we can call this a successful Mouse Gunner's quest. Mouse Gunner has indeed achieved his mission. Doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to stop trying to design craft that can achieve the same mission, but we have finally found something that can achieve the mission, and in my opinion, it achieves all of the boxes that I set out. Exactly as I intended it to be done, and it's also built in a way that it could do that for the mission. It has that docking clamp, so that if you had a refueling craft, you could refuel and go on to more complex missions out into space. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this video and a possible completion of this series. This is Mouse Gunner, signing out.